Hi, I'm Dave Smith. I'm the founder of Sequential Circuits back in 1974.
Very good. What first got you interested in synthesizers? Or did you come at this more as an engineer or as a musician?
I had a background both in music and in engineering. So, I was growing up, we had a piano in the house. I played the piano, just playing around. And then the 60s, the Beatles showed up. So, like everybody else in the world, I switched to guitar, started playing guitar. I went away to school, college, played in bands, played guitar or bass in bands. But I was also getting a degree in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California at Berkeley. So I finally graduate, and I've got two passions. I have technical engineering and computers and all of that. And this is pretty early for computers. This is 1971. But I also had this music background. So basically what happened is somebody said, hey, there's this little store in Santa Clara that has a synthesizer in it. I go, oh, I've heard of those. That sounds interesting. So I went down to this little store, and sure enough, they had an ARP Odyssey and a Mini Moog. And this is, I think, in 1972. And I had no idea what they did, but I saw a keyboard and a bunch of knobs, and I knew I had to have one. My first job at college was at Lockheed Missiles and Space, because back then the only jobs engineers got were in aerospace. I mean, that was it. There was no Silicon Valley yet, quite yet. It was just starting to become Silicon Valley. So I went to their credit union the next day, got a credit union loan for $1,500, went back the next day and bought the Mini Moog. That's what got me on this path. I picked the Mini Moog over the Odyssey for a bunch of reasons. And if you look at a Prophet 5 and a Mini Moog, it doesn't look anything like an Odyssey. I don't like sliders. I didn't like sliders then. Knobs, got to be knobs. So synthesizers were a perfect way to combine my music background and my technical background.
Do you still have that Mini Moog?
I still have it. It's in the other room. You'll have to get a shot of it. It was a serial 1340. I think they started at 1,000, so it was like, number 340 off the line. And yeah, somehow it's survived the almost 50 years now. In fact, maybe it was 50 years ago I got it.
Wow.
1972, 2022. Maybe you should be giving it a birthday party here soon.
Nice. With the Prophet 5, when you designed it, you integrated RAM memory and battery backup for that. Was that the first instance of RAM being used in a synthesizer?
I don't remember. The biggest thing technically on the Prophet 5 was using a microprocessor, which then used the non-volatile RAM battery backed up memory to go with it. I think I had memory in the Model 700 programmer. It had a battery and memory in it also, so that predated the Prophet 5. I think the Oberheim 4-voice also had battery backed up memory of some sort. It was only partially programmed. It wasn't the first one to use memory, but it was the first one to do the complete integration with 100% control of the analog synth.
Right. Were there any problems elucidate on whether there were any problems or special circumstances of introducing that sort of stuff into synthesizers?
Are we talking specifically the memory or the whole programmability?
Either or both.
Okay. Actually, the programmable aspect with the memory and the microprocessor was part of the easier design part of the Prophet 5. The hard part was all the analog stuff and keeping it in line and keeping things somewhat close to each other and keeping them all working. But the computer aspect, that was kind of easy. That's why I did it. My day job in the early 70s was working with microprocessors. So to me, it was like a no-brainer. Well, this is how you do it, of course. It's so much easier than random logic, which I had used in like my Model 800 digital sequencer. That was all discrete logic. but you replace it with one microprocessor, and it was so much more reliable, so much easier to do. No, I think that part of the Prophet 5 was quite reliable and not really any major problems with it. It was all mostly on the analog side of it.
You said something about keeping things close together on the analog side of that? What does that mean specifically?
Well, as you know, in a Prophet 5, there's 50, 60 trimmers, whatever it is, inside, and they all have to be set just right just to get the thing to sound fairly close, voice to voice, and even more so unit to unit. So the microprocessor did take care of a little bit of that by calibrating the oscillators, at least somewhat. Certainly not like they're calibrated these days, but back then it was kind of a big thing. Oh, I can get the oscillators really close by pressing this button and waiting 15 seconds. Because that was one of the big problems on like the 4-voice and 8-voice from Tom. You had to go through and manually tweak all of those and then keep doing it manually. So another great use of the microprocessor, just have it do the work, and it worked fairly well.
Great. Do you have any fun or crazy stories about developing or building or creating the Prophet 5 and or Prophet 10?
Oh, well, it was all crazy. You have to remember, I had a part-time job. I had a full-time job until I think early 1977. I finally quit and kind of lived off credit cards for a couple of years while trying to get everything going. I was selling the Model 800 digital sequencer and a Model 700 programming unit that added programmability to Minimogs and ARP 2600s. I actually waited a little while before starting on a Prophet 5 design. I had the idea because I knew about the microprocessors. I also had heard via EMU guys, Dave Rossum, that this solid-state music chipset was coming out. So it seemed obvious to me. Well, got a VCO, got a filter, got some envelopes, got some VCAs, got a microprocessor, piece of cake. So I started like maybe in spring of 1977, just started working on the design, and I pretty much did the whole thing. I designed the metal and the woodwork, the mechanical side. I laid out the circuit boards. I did the schematics. I wrote all the software, and that was an interesting process. I learned a lot, and I was still. It was kind of a big job for me. I was kind of maybe a little cocky about being able to actually pull it off. But I did breadboard one voice, just with some pots and, on one of those old, whatever you call them, breadboard units, and it sounded pretty good. It sounded really good. So I knew that when I had 5 of those in a box with programmability, that it was going to be a pretty awesome instrument. After that, it really was just trying to get it ready for production, trying to get it into production, trying to build enough. I mean, it was really crazy. It was totally crazy. Not anything. I'm trying to think of any one specific story that really stands out, and I'm blanking out at the moment, except that it was really hard because we had all this interest once we introduced it, and everybody wanted one. Out of the first 10 units, David Bowie, Rick Wakeman, Joe Zawinul, I mean, it was clear that this was going to be the next big thing, but we couldn't build them. We couldn't get enough parts. The parts didn't work very well. We'd get some envelope generators where they'd work fine until it warms up, and the release time would go, well, this. They go from 40 seconds to 10 seconds or something, and, it was really frustrating. Plus, we were trying to grow the company. We didn't have investors, trying to find ways of paying for stuff, getting things done, and having all this pent-up demand that we couldn't serve. It was highly frustrating. So that's kind of the memories of what was going on back then. Just general craziness, working nonstop, 7 days a week, trying to get it done.
frustrating, but I'm guessing also pretty exciting. At the
Oh,
same
well,
time.
tremendously exciting, connecting with the artists, seeing what they're doing with them, seeing them played live, hearing them in the recordings, especially as time went on. So, yeah, it was awesome and hard work, lots of really hard work, but fun, yeah. Rewarding, very rewarding.
I didn't, well, I've never thought about who actually designed the Prophet 5, the look of it and all. And you say you did, and to me it's one of the most iconic and beautiful synthesizers. So just coming
Thank you.
from...
Yeah, I agree with that.
just coming from not that field and putting that out there, and it's like, oh, that is really a beautiful instrument. So.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Obviously, there is a little bit of a reference to a mini Moog, but not exactly. Because it's polyphonic. So polymod is something that became a thing. Because there's modulation that's monophonic, but heck, individual per voice sounds more interesting, and certainly was. But I've mentioned this before, that the design idea actually came from, do you remember B&O stereo equipment from back then? It's a Danish company. They had back then, they keep changing their designs. They're always very into cool designs for their stuff. And back then, all their stuff was really sleek, and it was rosewood, and there was just this really cool, thin, woody look to it. And in fact, I was thinking of using rosewood initially for the Prophets. So that's kind of where I got the idea of this sleek, woody thing that ended up looking like that. And it was only when I was found this local guy to do the woodwork, and he said, well, I've got this great wood called koa. And I looked at that, and I said, this is really awesome, so I don't need to use rosewood. And so the first 1,000 units maybe were rosewood, until we kind of ran out of supply and had to switch to walnut for the rest of them. I think it was walnut. And of course, koa, I find out many years later, is an endangered species. It only comes from Hawaii, and we probably shouldn't have been building instruments using koa, but nobody knew. The concept of sustainability was not in existence in the 70s, so...
You said the first 1,000 units were rosewood, but you mean...
No, did I say rosewood? Yeah. I ended up using a koa, and the first 1,000 were koa, and some of them are just stunningly beautiful, and they still look great, 50 years later, 45 years later.
They certainly do, yeah. How did the Prophet 10 come about? Was it planned from the beginning, or was it an offshoot of the success of the Prophet 5?
Are we talking the dual manual Prophet 10?
Well, the original, the concept of the Prophet 10.
Okay, well, the backstory is that the very first units, first Prophet 5 units, you could buy either a 5-voice or a 10-voice. And the 10-voice had 2 voice cards, and the 5-voice had 1. And I think out of the first 10 units, 2 or 3 of them were 10 voices, and we sold a number of 10-voice units until we finally realized that it's just not reliable enough. There's too much heat in there. They break down a lot more. And so we had to stop building them, and we converted most of the existing 10s that were out there into Prophet 5s because it just didn't work. I screwed up. So after we started catching up with things, when we started working on the Rev 3 Prophet 5, which we had to do, we switched from the SSM parts to the Curtis parts because they were more reliable. So at that time we said, well, we should probably do a 10-voice now because we could do it more reliably. And then we got carried away and said, let's just make this huge boat anchor, double manual, sequencer-driven thing. So it turned out, I'm not sure how we, I think it just probably came from discussing, well, what would we do if we wanted to build this ultimate synth? So I think the development was kind of at the same time as the Rev 3s, or right after the Rev 3s came out in 81 or 82, I forget, somewhere around then. You probably know better than I do.
Were there any Prophet 10s that had the SSM chips?
Yeah. Well, no, not dual
the
manual.
dual manual.
No.
Okay, so all the dual manuals were the...
Yeah, because that came when we were redesigning the Rev 3. So the Rev 3 Prophet 5 voice card is what's in the Prophet 10 dual manual.
Can I pitch in a question?
Sure.
About your heat problem with the old 10s, what I've been wondering about is like, why has it been running from plus minus 15 volt rails? Like the old SSM 2040, I think the maximum peak-to-peak voltage it can output is maybe 2 volts. So like if it would have run for, I guess, plus minus 5 volt, it would also run with less heat. Was there a specific reason for the plus minus 50 volt?
I don't remember. That was sort of the standard for analog instruments, having rails of plus minus 15 volts, and some things ran, I think the Curtis parts ran on plus 12, minus 5, or maybe plus 15. I forget all those details, except I think we used the recommended design for all those parts. I assume they were plus minus 15. As you know, Dave Rossum designed, I think, the filter chip. I forget, Rondow might have done the oscillator. I forget who did which chips, but we knew, Dave, EMU was across the town from us. So when I actually designed my very first product, the Model 600 analog sequencer, I actually used an EMU VCO module in it as the master clock. Because I had just met them, and I said, "Oh, that looks like fun. I'll just throw that in there, and then you could use this thing as a waveform generator by driving the clock real fast and voltage controlling it." So I knew about the chips even before they were ready, and so I worked with them. They were somewhat involved, looking over the circuits I was doing, and so they helped out with some of that stuff. So, but as far as why we used one rail or the other, I don't remember.
When you're designing a synth, do you have any process that you follow? Do you always, for instance, start with a feature set and then design around that? Or I don't know if this will be an interesting question at all, but I'm just wondering about your process of synthesizer design.
My process for synth design has probably changed over the years. Obviously with the Prophet 5, it was, very specific. I was working with John Bowen, who is Solaris. Back then he had done a little work with Moog, and we kind of worked together, and he came up with an initial front panel, and then I kind of worked from that. And it's usually a matter of going two directions at once. You kind of have to go from the top down. You need a panel. Like these days, we always start with the panel, but you have to know what's going to be underneath it. So the circuitry kind of has to work its way up, and then the two of them meet. Okay, the front panel does this, the circuitry does this, and then you line it all up, and then tweak things a little to, we could add this one little thing and add one switch and have this awesome thing happen without adding any circuitry. Or if we had one VCA, we could do this. Or it's a continuous thing. You have to know both sides. But I think certainly these days it's much more about the front panel, but we're trying to feature something in the sound. Like Pro 3 is a great example. Okay, let's have a couple VCOs, but let's throw in a wave shape oscillator also, and then let's have all three filters in there. Let's just put a Prophet 5 filter, an SEM filter, and a ladder filter. Let's just do all of them. So we start with that, and then we come back up, say, okay, we're going to take a sequencer that's very similar to the Pro 2 and enhance that a little. We're going to do all the programmable CVs in and out, so that has to be there. That's all front panel stuff, but we start with the concept of what the voice is. So I guess that's a big part of it, is what is the voice? And that's, as you know, is where the magic is. The hardest part about designing an instrument is knowing when to stop. I think we're pretty good at that because I'm a big fan of constrained design. I don't want this thing to do everything. I want it to do the right things. If you have too many controls, then it's no fun to play. If there's menu diving and hidden features, it's no fun to play. And I think that's why some of our products like the Prophet 6 or the OB6 musicians love them so much. It's knob per function, there's no display, you just play it, It sounds great, and it has enough features and enough cool stuff that it'll keep the tweakers busy also, because it's a synth. You have to have a bunch of weird shit going on, but you have to know when to stop. And that's where our biggest arguments are. Oh, we really should have this. No, we shouldn't. Yes, we should. And because if you ask anybody about any one feature, should this feature be in there? The answer is always yes. Of course it should be, because it's a feature. It's cool. But you have to know when to stop. And, when I look at other products out there, I could see that they didn't know when to stop. Keep it a musical instrument. Keep it approachable, fun to play. Give it the personality that comes from the voice generally. That's huge. That's, I think, where the magic is in most of my products.
That's a great answer.
Extended answer.
Oh, perfect. Can you describe the vibe of working at Sequential in the early days? Why you sort of already have crazy and exciting.
Yeah, the Sequential vibe and way back was just crazy. We were all kids. We didn't, I was in my 20s. I didn't know what I was doing. None of us knew what we were doing. We made the mistake of doing all the manufacturing ourselves. So we had a small place initially, and then we, in 1980, I think, moved to a much bigger place in San Jose. And yeah, it was just crazy trying to, buying wave solder machines and figuring out how to build things and buying testers, these big Hewlett-Packard testing machines you put circuit boards on, and and we were all just learning how to do this stuff. We'd build these old, huge wooden desks for the technicians so they had all their test equipment and speakers, and they'd put a Prophet 5 down and have to go through all the testing procedures. And yeah, it was, hiring like crazy, trying to find people who knew a little bit about synths. And, 'cause we got up to like 180 people at the biggest, which is, probably half of them or more were in the production side. And yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. We were just winging it the whole time. But it was fun. We had a lot of good times. We'd have a lot of big company parties. We'd, randomly, one day we'd just have buses pull up, take all the employees and go out to lunch or go have a party or go on a picnic or something. And so we tried to keep it, interesting and fun, and just about everybody was into music, so that helped because they, the products we were building, they could see musicians using them, they could hear them on records. So that was all very fun. It was very wacky. There are downsides too. We never really got to the point of being a highly successful company. We'd come out with a couple new products and sales would go up, and we'd hire more people, and we'd be doing well. We'd have little bonuses at Christmas time. And then the next year, somebody else would come out with a new product, and our sales would drop if we didn't have our new one ready. And we'd have to lay people off because we couldn't support all of that. And that was just a nightmare. I hated all of that because it was just a roller coaster, and it was just the stress, and it wasn't fair to the employees. And so that was definitely a major downside. And I learned from that when I started this company, and 20 years ago, actually, this year, as Dave Smith Instruments. At first, I didn't want any employees. I didn't want to go through that again. I was like PTSD. I didn't want a big company, so it's just me for 5 years. So I did the Evolver desktop, and then I did the rack mount Evolver, and then I did the poly Evolver, and then I did the mono Evolver, and then I started working on the Prophet 08, and realized that I needed help. I can't do this, so I hired my first person, who's Andrew McGowan, who's still at the company, and so he started. His official title was the other guy, and so I just dumped stuff to him because I was doing sales, I was doing repair, I was, everything, because I was the only person there. And then soon we hired a second person and a third, and as of a year ago, we got all the way up to 15 people. So we've been a huge company. But this time I decided employees are awesome. It's all a matter of size, and it was a very conscious effort to not grow unnecessarily. Whereas, as a kid, yeah, let's grow, let's do more stuff, let's build cheaper products, let's do this, let's do that. It was all about becoming a big deal. And this time, all the growth is accidental. It was organic. It just happened. We come up with a new cool instrument. People would buy them. Okay, we're selling more. Let's hire one more person. Hire one person a year, and it's so much more sane. It's just, how's that for a short answer?
It's great. It feels crazy back then to go in this as a synth designer and a musician, and all of a sudden you're having to source wave solder machines, and I mean, it seems like it would be totally out of anyone's element to
it was
be thrust into that position. So.
Yeah, so it was highly stressful. It was a roller coaster, but as I mentioned, it was a lot of fun. There were a lot of good times involved also.
And certainly had an impact.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Who came up with that iconic Sequential Wizard ad? And in this episode, we want to recreate that with the wizard standing there and the Prophet 10 and the Prophet 5 and all of those. Is there any background to that?
Yeah, a lot of that came from our first sales manager. His name was Bob Stiles. He actually worked at a music store called Rod Argent's Music Store in London, and they were the first people that brought the Prophet 5 over. And at some point, I forget how it happened, he ended up working for us and moving to San Jose. And he was into a lot of that, wizard, English, all that stuff, and I wasn't. So he came up with that. And I think we had a mask, or somebody found a mask, and somebody made that robe. And so, it was actually somebody dressed up like that. And then we also had an artist called John Mattis, who did all those airbrushed ads and all the posters and stuff. He actually currently lives within about 5 minutes of where we are right now. He still doing stuff, so he's still in San Francisco. So he also picked up on that from the artistic side for a lot of the airbrushed ads. So yeah, we were, and the stuff on the circuit boards, and we would just have some fun with all of that. There was no plan. It was just sort of evolved.
Yeah, the stuff on the circuit board makes it feel like we're serious about what we're doing, but we're also playful, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, we took ourselves very seriously, but in other ways we didn't take ourselves very seriously at all. And as you know, when you did circuit boards back then, sheet of Mylar and, black tape, you had to physically cut and move. That's how you designed circuit boards. You did them at double scale, and then they photographically shrunk them, but you had to sit there and actually put down a piece of black tape that would be a trace that goes from this IC to this resistor. So you end up with this big thing when it's done, and you add some ground plane, and then there's always space available, so somebody would write something or put in some random artwork. All that artwork came from Letraset. I don't know, most people these days probably don't know what that is. But that's where fonts came from. That's where the Prophet 5 font and the Sequential Circuits font came from. I'd go to a store, look through all these Letraset things and say, well, this one looks cool, I'll use this. And you buy a couple sheets and you rub them off onto a piece of paper or rub them off onto a circuit board and say something, or somebody would write something in, or put in mushrooms, or, all that weird shit we used to do. So, yeah, it was just having fun. I think it was only towards the very end of Sequential that CAD started becoming real. I think we actually bought a machine at some point. But before that, schematics were drawn by hand. The layouts were all done by hand. And then you had to physically, when you're comparing it, so you do blueprints of the board and blueprints of the schematic. And somebody'd have to get there with a yellow marker and say, okay, this line goes from here to there, and they'd look, okay, it's done, so they mark that off, and you'd have to literally do that manually. There was no automatic checkings, and so sometimes you'd catch everything, sometimes you wouldn't, because it was far from a perfect process. But, you know, that's how we did things back then. It was much slower, painfully slower.
To talk about circuit boards reminds me of the Prophet 10 we're resurrecting right now. It's signed by Maria L. and it has a little heart on it, and it's like so personal. And do you know who Maria L. was?
Maria L. You know, like I said, we probably had 50 or 60 people out there. I remember some Marias, but I don't remember the L.
I was hoping you'd say, yeah, that was such and such, and she still lives right down the street.
Yeah, this is in San Jose, you know, it's just 50 miles from here, as you know. And, who knows?
Yeah. Can you give us like a brief rundown of the different revs of Prophet 5 and what prompted, let's move from Rev 1 to Rev 2, or for instance?
Okay. So there's basically 4 versions of the Prophet 5. Rev 1, I think there were 180 of them. And there were solid-state music parts, and there were a lot of problems with them, you know, because you build prototypes, they seem to work, you go into production, and when you're a tiny company, you don't know what you're doing, then they don't work perfectly. So we did 1 rev of the boards to Rev 2, still using solid-state music parts, but I couldn't tell you what the difference was between the two, except I think I fixed a bunch of problems, so they were somewhat more reliable, but I don't remember what the changes were. And then at some point we decided we just had to get rid of the SSM parts because they were just over temperature, just weren't stable, and we were having a hard time getting them. They couldn't build them, and we'd be waiting for the parts, so our production would slow down. So I'd been working with Doug Curtis, and his parts seemed a little more solid. So we did the Rev 3, and that was started about serial number 1200, maybe 1300, is when we switched. And that was even more of a redesign. So not only the Curtis parts, but I think I just kind of went through the whole thing. Maybe using a better DAC for the control voltages, just a lot of stuff. Because this was like 2 years into production, maybe, or a year and a half. And so all the rest of the original Prophet 5s were Rev 3s, and we sold almost 7,000 of them, I think, total. So 180 Rev 1s, about 1,000 Rev 2s, and then 5,500 Rev 3s. And then, as we all know, we did the Rev 4 that has been out for a year and a half now. And that was a fun project to work on. I learned so much about the original products because I had both units, you know, the new prototype, and then I had my old Prophet 5. It's this one. No, that one. That was actually the last Prophet 5 ever built, and I've had it all this time, so I had to tweak it up and then, you know, compare them. And the timing turned out that I got the first prototypes to the new one right when COVID hit. So I was pretty much locked down anyhow, like everybody else, and it was good timing because I didn't mind being locked down because I was working on this new Prophet 5. Almost for some parts of it in isolation from everybody else. So it was just a very fun project. And as you know, what we did is we tried to emulate both the Rev 1.2s with solid-state music filters, because a new one had just been designed by Dave Rossum, who designed the original 2040. So that we have is it the 2041, like 2140? I forget the numbers.
2140.
2140, thank you. And for the VCOs, we're using the Curtis parts because On Chip, which is Doug's company, started making the 3340s again. So we have real 3340s from Doug's company, real 3320s from Doug's company for the filter, and then we have real 2140s Dave Rossum designed for the Rev 2 filters, Rev 1, Rev 2. So these are all the real things developed by the real people from back then. So we had access. That's one of the reasons that we did this, because as you can guess, people have been asking for me to do a Prophet 5 for like 40 years. And I keep saying, no, I did it once. Why would I do it again? Rah, 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 rah. I was, just didn't want to do it because I'd rather do new things, right? As a designer, do you want to redo what you did before, or do you want to do something new? It's like if you're a musician, everybody wants to hear the song you did 30 years ago, and they don't want to hear your new stuff. So, but once we got the idea and knew we had access to both filters, then it became an obvious thing to do. And so we started working on what we called the Rev 4. And we kept it as close as possible. There was temptations. Oh, let's put effects in. No. Oh, let's make stereo output. No, it's mono. So we very, very little changed. We had to add, velocity and aftertouch, but it's just a switch. Real simple. Vintage knob was huge, of course, as you know. That was the biggest discovery that we came up with to really match the old instruments. What happened is we had like in this room like 5 old Prophet 5s. I think we had a Rev 1, a Rev 2, and 3 or 4 Rev 3s, and they were all different. I spent all this time matching envelopes and matching LFOs perfectly, and I go, oh wait, I was matching it to this unit, that one's different. And then of course they're all different voice to voice on top of that. So you realize there's no one exact perfect reference point for any of these old synths. So with the vintage knob, we said, okay, well, you can dial it all the way down, make it sound real modern, everything's really tight, voice to voice, or you can kind of loosen it up however you want. And we kind of actually sort of matched it. So Rev 4, tight. Rev 3, a little looser, because, the Rev 3s were not perfect, but they were a lot better. You put it to Rev 2 and things really start loosening up. And Rev 1, it's all over the place. And usually most people like it right between 2 and 3, because you get that difference in envelope times and frequencies and everything, voice to voice, that just sound great when you're doing unison or playing pads or something. It just, everything comes alive. So that was a fun project. I'm glad I did it, and I think people really appreciate it. And it's nice because you could still have your old Prophet 5s and keep it in the studio, but you could get a new one. You could actually tour with it, which is kind of nice because nobody wants to take their old ones out because you'd be crazy, as you know, to risk it. So,
did the Prophet 1 or Rev 1 to Rev 2? I guess my perception has been, okay, the Rev 1s were all hand built and the Rev 2s were production. Is that
no?
True?
They were all built with the same assembly methods, as were the Rev 3s. Yeah, there was no big changes in there.
Okay. What was the story behind getting the Sequential name back from Yamaha, and what prompted that? And that was the most heartwarming thing I'd heard in a long time when I read that happened.
It was awesome. So, as you know, ancient history, Yamaha bought Sequential in 1988, 89. We were about to go out of business, and they bought it, and never quite sure why, and I don't think they were quite sure why, because it all happened really quickly. But after about a year, they just shut it down. But, of course, they owned everything that was part of Sequential before that, including the names. So when I started my new company 20 years ago, I called it Dave Smith Instruments. Kind of boring, but I didn't want to use a Sequential name. I didn't own it. And I was trying to do something different and new. I had no idea where it was going to end up. It was just something to do. And fast forward a few years, 2013, I got my Grammy with Kakahashi-san, the founder of Roland, for MIDI. And I didn't know this was happening because he didn't tell me, but he wrote a letter to the president of Yamaha and said, hey, it'd be kind of cool if you gave Dave the rights to his names back because you're not using them, why not? It'd be cool to do. And damned if they didn't. So I got a call from somebody at Yamaha, said, or maybe I met him at a NAMM show, I forget the details, but it was more or less like, hey, you want your Sequential name back? And I go, okay. It wasn't something I was asking for. It wasn't something I was thinking about. I said, sure, okay. And so I said, okay, well, let's make a deal. You could pay this much. And I said, sure, no, okay. Well, you could pay less if you want. I said, Sure. Okay. I mean, it was just like, it was awesome. And so this was also when we were working on the Prophet 6. So we get this name back, get the trademarks, and we go, well, what are we going to do with it? Well, Prophet 6, let's call it a sequential product. So we did. Company name was still Dave Smith Instruments, but let's throw it on a product. So that's how that all happened. And I think that year at NAMM, NAMM has this big meeting for everybody the first day of NAMM, and for some reason they had Tom Oberheim and I on the stage talking to all the dealers, and that was when I first announced that we actually changed the name, and now Sequential was back. For the first time in 40 years, there was a sequential product at a NAMM show. And then we officially changed the company name in 2018, because it makes more sense. I like it because my email name went from Dave at Dave Smith Instruments to Dave at Sequentials. Much smaller, much easier to type. That was the best part.
It's a great story.
It was. It was so awesome of Yamaha to do that. That was really cool.
What's your favorite sequential product, new or old?
Who's your favorite child? I can't do that because they're all different. Prophet 5, sure, it's the first one. But do you favor your first child? You can't do that. Prophet X is one of my favorites. I just love it, maybe because it's the only one of our products that has samples in it, but that's a highly underappreciated instrument because people are confused. They think samplers, so they think this, and they don't understand the concept of, well, this is samples as a musical instrument as opposed to samples as a rompler. I can go on for hours on that. Prophet 12. Always one of my favorites. Something magical about that. But evolvers, they've all got their personalities and they all have reasons to love them. But that's a quick answer without going too deep.
All right. This is a complete left turn, but we're producing a documentary on Ensoniq.
Okay.
And I just wanted to throw in if you had any insight into Ensoniq as a company from the perspective of competitor, or did you know those guys, or anything to throw in your perspective on Ensoniq as a company
well, we've of course met them all. Actually, this is kind of funny. There was a point where when Ensoniq was first getting going and getting to a point where selling a lot of instruments, they started stealing all of our sales guys. Just, stealing that's a little harsh, but all of a sudden a lot of our regional guys started working for Ensoniq and not us. Some of them, even from the office, moved over to Ensoniq. It was funny because it was about the same time that EMU was starting to grow also, and a lot of our engineers started quitting to go work for EMU. So at one point, we had a tagline that, sequential, training engineers for EMU and salespeople for Ensoniq. It was just what happened, and it wasn't a big deal. And the whole industry back then, it was a close group of people. It wasn't a huge industry. Everybody knew everybody else. We'd all get together at NAMM and hang out. And, so there weren't really hard feelings, even though we were kind of fierce competitors at the time. But there was a lot of this crossover happening. So, Ensoniq was smart because they came out with the first, really inexpensive sampling machines. EMU was smart because they did that before, because they got things down from sim conveyors and Fairlights down to the emulators, and then Ensoniq came in and got them from emulators down to all their products. So it was a process, and it was fun to go to NAMM every year because everybody'd run around and see what everybody else was doing, because somebody'd always have something new, so we'd all go check it out. But it was fun times.
Great. Okay, moving a little more into the present, with Sequential having been recently acquired by Focusrite, how will your role with the company change? Will you be more into design and not having to worry about day-to-day business stuff, or what do you see there?
Having Focusrite pick us up is awesome from my point of view. Like we were saying earlier, I never really wanted to run a company. I don't have any interest in running a company. And the company's only grown because we, I guess, build instruments that people really like. So we sell a lot of them. And, you know, I'm not as young as I used to be, and I'm starting to think, well, I really should have somebody else run this company. I mean, that's really the right thing to do, and to make sure it keeps going forever. And Focusrite was perfect. You know, I talked to a number of companies, and the cultural fit with them is like perfect. And what's really amazing is that it all happened over Zoom. I still haven't met them in person. This is a year later. But so now, you know, we hired a CEO last July who's running the company now, and I'm more just doing the fun stuff, the new designs, engineering. That's my hobby. You know, I don't want to retire. I'm not going to go out fishing, and I want to design synths. That's what I do. So this is perfect. Now I don't have to run the company, but I can still do what I really like to do. It's awesome.
They seem like in their previous acquisitions, they're like, this is a good company. We like what it's doing. Just keep doing it. And
yeah. Oh yeah. It's very hands off. Then they haven't said we want you to do this. We want you to do that. There's no change. The company's still exactly the same. Nobody's quit. We've only hired 1 or 2 new people. We are going to grow more. We've got some pretty awesome stuff coming up in the next 2 or 3 months. Hint, hint, wink, wink. That I think, well, it's obvious that it's still done by us. There's no Focusrite influence on any of that. It's not like we're working with Novation and designing new stuff together yet. I'm not giving anything away by saying that this is all just a very gradual process, because you're right. Focusrite buys a company that's well run and lets them keep doing what they're doing. There's nothing that is more confusing than big companies who buy other companies and then destroy them or take them over or try to change them. And so why did you buy them? You bought them for what they are. Why would you change them? So it's been great. It's been perfect. So
yeah, it seemed to me like it would be perfect for Dave Smith to do that.
Yes,
as opposed to looking at creative taking over in Sonic and then.
Yeah. There's plenty of other stories in the industry, and that's why I say Focusrite is so awesome, because it's a perfect fit, and and our team is great. I mean, we've got, I think out of the 20 years, we've only had 1 employee actually leave. Everybody else comes and stays. It's a great team. We all get along. We have fun. We love what we're doing. Everybody's a synth nut, obviously. So it's very, and nothing's changed, like I said. One day to the next, we're owned by somebody else now. Well, back to work.
Perfect. I was going to ask if you see any cross-pollination with brands like Novation in the future.
Yeah, sky's the limit in the future. They've got Focusrite and Novation and their other companies. There's a lot of great technology. We have a lot of great technology, and yeah, it's going to all kinds of stuff possible going forward. And that's all I'll say.
Okay. Maybe we've kind of already touched on this one, but what synthesizer accomplishment are you the most proud of? And is there something you feel like you still need to do?
There's always more synths to design and build. We always have ideas, and we're limited by how many we could do at one time. The thing I'm most proud of is a little bit more on a global basis, but starting a company, starting Sequential Circuits, and doing everything we did was pretty awesome back then. Obviously we've influenced a lot of stuff, music, just technology, everything. But you could argue that, okay, I was in the right place at the right time. You know, I knew about microprocessors when nobody else in the industry did. I saw the opportunity of the chips, so I was able to put it together and do something like that. So yeah, what I'm most proud of is that I actually have done it twice. So I came back 20 years later, started Dave Smith Instruments, and here we are. And this company is much more successful than the original one was, and because everything I've learned. But to be able to be relevant a second time and starting from scratch a second time, you know, there's no investment, there's no big thing. I just kind of started this company, and here we are, you know, and that's probably my shining achievement, I think. You know, the whole MIDI thing is, you know, like kind of like whatever. That was just a one-shot thing, but doing this twice, that's I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is indeed. What should we know about Sequential that I haven't already asked you? Or about Dave Smith?
Well, let's talk about me for a bit. Well, the new Sequential, like I've said a couple times, is it's really awesome. There's something about having the right people, the right size, to be able to do things like we've done with such a small team. When I compare us and our product line to huge companies out there and their product lines, you know, it's like, wow, you know, this is a pretty special thing we have going here. And we seem to be able to keep doing it. And again, these couple new products coming out soon. I think we're going to be making some more very cool statements, and people are going to love them. That's one of our biggest problems is musicians get mad at us because we come out with something new and they go, shit, now I got to get this one too. I'm going to have to sell something. I had a couple artists here just yesterday showing them one of our new products, and same thing. I got to have this. When can I get it? And oh, my wife's going to kill me. Oh, I'm going to sell something. What am I going to do? So, yeah, there's something magical about what we ended up with, and it's very cool. The old company, I think I went through that enough. It was just, you know, when it did finally close down, it was actually a relief, because I was just like, you realize that when you have a big company like that, you can't quit. You can't say, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. You can't leave your own company. You know, you could try to sell it maybe, but you're still going to get involved. It's just not something, like if you're an employee and you're working, you have a cool job. If there's another job that comes up that's better, or if you get burned out, you can quit and move on. If it's your own company, you kind of can't. So it was sort of a relief. It's kind of obnoxious thing to say in some ways, but it was sort of nice to all of a sudden not have that stress. And I think that's why I didn't really do much for like those 10 years, the 90s. You know, I did some consulting here and there, got involved with a few things. I started the Korg R&D group, which is still in existence, down in San Jose. So I did some things, but I didn't have the passion to go out and start up again. And so, yeah, I call the 90s the digital dark ages, because there wasn't really anything fun going on in synthesis. And it wasn't until I was helping Roger Lynn on his Adrenaline product, his little effects boxes, his late 90s, I guess. I helped him kind of finish it up, and that gave me the hardware bug again, to be able to hold something that does this, and it'll do this tomorrow. If I turn this knob in 20 years, it's going to do the same thing. It's my OS. I'm not having to update, because, you know, I did that whole soft synth thing in the mid-90s. You know, the first professional soft synth called Reality from Seer Systems. And, you know, that was the new thing. We had to explain to people what a soft synth was. You know, we'd go to NAMM and be playing it with a controller. And, hey, that sounds good. What is that? It's a software synthesizer. What do you mean? What is it? It's software is making the sound, but where is it? No, it's software inside that computer is making this sound. I still don't get it. So we started there because it was a brand new thing that nobody knew that could be possible. And we actually called it the future of music synthesis. And unfortunately, we were kind of right. But I quickly realized, I've told the story a million times, that, I never played with it, and I asked myself, why am I not playing this thing? It has subtractive synthesis, it has additive, it has FM, it has physical modeling, all this cool stuff. And it was because, click, click, drag, drag, move this, click into this menu, and then go over here and play a few notes, and then you go back, and it's like, this was no fun. So I got the bug again, just working on hardware, and I didn't have to work with Windows. I didn't have to work with Mac. I could just build something, and that's when I started working on the little Evolver desktop, which if you look at it next to the Adrenaline, there's some commonality between the two. So you can see that, oh, hey, Roger, I kind of like that idea, and then that's what got me the hardware bug again. So it was fun times, and here we are.
You got any other questions?
I think that was, everything about that was perfect.
Yeah, it's great. And unless there's something you think we ought to add in there.
I need to be prompted. If you think of something, I can start talking again. But
well, I have one more about the thing we call the digital dark ages. It's a good name, I think, but I'm trying to explain it myself, because if you listen to all these vintage instruments that came before, they sound like way bigger and spacious than like pretty much everything that happened in that age. So how on earth is it possible that like the market moved away from good sound to bad sound? It's like the opposite of an economical effect. Like it's always good money pushes away bad money. That's the way it works. And like in music, the opposite happened.
I have the
Now
answer.
It's like a revival of it. So
here's what happened. Starting with the Prophet 5, it was so popular, not as much because it was a synthesizer, but because you could do emulative sounds and hit a button and change from an organ to strings to brass to E-piano to whatever. And keyboard players could never do that before. That's why they all had racks. They had their, their Rhodes and their Hammonds and, maybe a Mini Moog here. But that's what they wanted, was emulative sounds. So they got better, as more polysynths came out. And then the DX7 came out, and all of a sudden, I don't have to carry a Rhodes anymore, which is, I think, 90% of its success. But it was even more emulative. And then the death blow was the M1. In 1987, because now they really had real pianos, real string, real everything, and that's really what they want. And that's why the M1 was the most popular synth ever built. 250,000, whatever it was. That was it. And so everybody forgot about synthesizers, because they didn't really want them as a synth so much as emulative. So the digital dark ages started with the M1, and ever since then, 3 or 4 companies have been building M1s. They're just more voices, more higher resolution samples, better samples, but they're all M1s, and they still use them. And that's a lot of touring musicians for big bands have to have an 88-note Rompler because they have to, and I understand that. But what happened starting in early 2000s, I point to when the Evolver came out in 2002. That was also the year that Bob Moog introduced the Voyager. And that's sort of the start of the analog revolution. I'm kind of making that up, but starting then, people started finding the old units and for free in garbage bins, this, or people giving them away. And this time around, people like synthesizers because they're synthesizers. They can give a shit about the emulative properties of them. So that's why it's continued to grow for these last 20 years, and it's not going to stop. I think subtractive synthesis, subtractive analog synthesis has passed the test of time. It's been around for over 50 years. Everybody knows what happens when you turn a cutoff knob. Everybody knows what happens when you turn a resonance knob. This isn't going away. There's something permanent about that whole sound. 2 oscillators, filter, envelopes. End of story. So that's what got us out of the digital dark ages. and it's here forever, I think.
That's great.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
That's why. I mean, I've thought a lot about that. It's very easy to see in hindsight, but while it was happening, we didn't know. I mean,
But still, I get it from a performing musician kind of point, but I don't get it from a studio composer point.
well, but that's the whole music. Music has changed in this last 20 years significantly, because even in the 90s, home recording was just starting. It wasn't quite here. It started, though, in early 90s, and it was growing and growing and growing. But music itself has changed, and there's so many music styles now that are based on some guy with a bunch of synths who works with all the big names and gives them beats and gives them this and that. And this isn't an overnight thing, but so the appreciation of all these different sounds and interactions with some of these old products, they just weren't. There wasn't a setting for them to be appreciated, I don't think, by the music artist side of things, and that's only last 10 years. So that also mixes in with all of that. So it's been a pretty cool evolution to see all of this happening, and but yeah, it's. Back then, there was a thing where we used to think that all the Japanese synthesizers sounded really thin, because the filters sort of did compared to the big Oberheims and Prophets and so forth. But what we didn't appreciate was the personality of that sound and that instrument as a musical instrument. And it doesn't have to be big and fat and thick, and 'cause sometimes you don't want that in a mix. So this time around, people are appreciating the personality of, oh, well, yeah, that thing really has its own sound. And I still have this knee-jerk reaction that, well, you like that? That doesn't sound any, because that's the way we kind of started up. But now I think musicians really appreciate that any keyboard, old or new, can have its own sound and can come in useful and work on a track and be the highlight of a track. I mean, it all depends. So,
Right context.
yeah, context, exactly.